Montana Territory, early spring of 1879, just past the thaw. The wind still carried a bite when Wyatt McCree rode up to the edge of the pine woods and saw smoke curling from the chimney of the cabin he had heard about in town. He stopped his horse on the rise and sat still, watching. Folks in Deerfield whispered about the woman who lived there alone with her 2 children, ever since her husband disappeared during the blizzard 3 winters ago. Some said she buried him out back. Some said he ran off. Wyatt did not listen to gossip much, but what kept him coming back each night wasn't a rumor. It was her, Faye Ellison. The first time he saw her, she was in town trading eggs for flour, her dark hair pinned up under a threadbare bonnet, her eyes sharp and tired and proud. He had tipped his hat. She nodded and walked on. That was months ago. Since then, he kept finding reasons to ride past her place. Then he stopped needing a reason. Now, every night for the past 6 nights, Wyatt had come after sundown, dismounting quietly, setting himself down on the log near her porch, and waiting. He did not knock. He did not call out. He just waited. Some nights the curtains moved. Once he was sure he heard footsteps inside, but the door stayed shut. Tonight, though, something felt different. Inside the cabin, Faye stood near the window, arms folded, watching the silhouette of the tall cowboy by the porch. Again. She did not know what made him come back. She did not know why she had not told him to leave. She should have. She had enough to worry about keeping the roof patched, keeping the hens alive, and raising Florence and Finley without letting the world swallow them whole. But every night he sat there, quiet, steady, like the moon rising. Something in her chest loosened. Florence, her eldest at 10, tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, he's back." "I know," Faye said. Finley, younger by 2 years, peeked out the other window. "He ain't cold." "He's in a coat," Faye said, voice low, but her eyes stayed on him. She had never seen him in town before that first day by the mercantile. She had asked around. He came from East Texas, folks said. Fought in the war, lost his folks. Got land out near Bitter Creek but never took to farming. Rode with cattle outfits sometimes but mostly kept to himself. She thought about her shotgun leaning by the door. Then thought about how he had never once tried to come closer than that log. Faye turned to the children. "Go on to bed." Florence looked up at her mother. "You going to open the door tonight?" Faye's mouth twitched, but she only said, "Bed." When the children had gone, she waited a moment longer, then stepped to the door, hand resting on the handle. She could hear the night birds and the wind through the trees. And still, she knew he was out there. She opened the door slowly. Wyatt stood from the log but did not step forward. Faye looked at him, her voice low but steady. "Come in." His boots were careful on the porch planks. He took off his hat as he stepped inside, and she noticed how his eyes scanned the room, protective, respectful. The fire crackled low in the hearth. She closed the door behind him. "Would you like coffee?" she asked. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She poured from the kettle without asking where he had come from or why he kept showing up. He took the tin cup from her hand gently, their fingers brushing for the first time. They sat at the small table, she across from him. The room was quiet but not tense. "I do not mean to bother you," Wyatt said, voice low. "You have not." She glanced at the window. "But I wonder why you keep coming." "I do not rightly know," he said. "Only that I want to be here." She looked at him for a long time. "My husband is not dead, not by law, but he is gone." Wyatt did not flinch. "I figured. He left in the winter, never came back. No note, no trail, just gone." "You were alone since then?" Wyatt asked gently. She nodded. "I had to be." He set his cup down. "I can leave if you want," but she shook her head. "No, I think you should stay for a little while." That night he did not press her. He sat with her by the fire while the wind picked up outside. She asked him about the war. He told her losing his brother was the worst of it. She asked him what he did now. He said he fixed fences, broke horses, and helped when people let him. When the fire died low, she stood and looked down at him. "You cannot stay the night, Wyatt McCree." "I know," he said, standing slowly. She walked him to the door. He stepped out into the dark, putting his hat back on. "Will you be back tomorrow?" she asked, voice almost shy. He looked at her with eyes soft as dusk. "Only if you want me to," she hesitated. "I do." Then she closed the door gently. Inside, she leaned against it, heart tapping fast in her chest. Upstairs, Florence whispered from the loft, "Mama." "Yes," Faye called softly. "Did he come in?" Faye smiled just a little. "Yes, baby, he did." The next morning dawned quiet, snow melting in slender rivulets along the edges of the yard. Faye stepped outside with a basket under her arm, boots pressing into soft ground. She paused when she saw the log near the porch, the one he'd sat on every night, damp from morning dew. There was a small bundle folded neatly on top, a length of canvas with stitchwork along the edge, the kind used to patch saddle skirts or oilcloth coats. She touched it, and beneath it, she found a single apple and a twist of jerky wrapped in waxed paper. She looked toward the tree line. He was already gone. Later, while Florence read to Finley from the worn reader inside, Faye set her shoulders and walked the half-mile trail to the edge of the pines. She hadn't meant to go looking, but her hands had worked without thinking, basket swinging, step sure. The land sloped down to a stream where the cottonwoods grew thick. She stopped when she saw the horse. It drank from the far bank, reins looped loose over a branch. Wyatt stood a few paces away, mending a fence rail between two scrub posts. His coat was off, sleeves rolled, a long scar running pale along his forearm. He looked up when she stepped out of the brush. "I didn't expect you to come find me," he said, wiping his hands on his trousers. "I didn't expect to either," she replied, brushing a curl from her cheek. "You left something," he nodded toward the basket, "meant it for the children. Then you should have handed it to them yourself." He leaned on the post, arms crossed, didn't want to cross a line. "You didn't." They stood there, breeze lifting the cottonwood leaves. Faye watched him a long moment, then set the basket down and stepped closer. "What do you want from me, Wyatt?" Her voice held no anger, just the steady weight of a woman who had run out of room for guessing. He considered her. "Not a thing you ain't willing to give." She narrowed her eyes, not suspicious, just measuring. "I ain't asking for a place to sleep or a piece of land," he continued. "I ain't asking for a promise. I just want to be near you. And the children, if you'll let me." "That's simple, I reckon it is." "I don't know what I can give you," she admitted. "I feel like what I had's already been spent." He tilted his head. "You ever think maybe it's not gone, just waiting to be seen again?" She didn't answer. Instead, she bent to pick up the basket and turned to leave. After a few steps, she stopped and looked back. "Florence's birthday's next week. She's never had a cake." His brow lifted slightly. "I've got sugar but no eggs," she said. "I can get eggs. Then I guess I'll see you tomorrow." That night, he didn't come to the porch. She thought she might miss the quiet shape of him out there, lit by firelight through the curtains. But the next day, just after midday, he arrived with a cloth sack of eggs and a small tin of cinnamon. "Traded a coat for the spice," he said, handing it over. "You didn't have to do that." "I know, still did." She let him walk with her to the coop. The hens weren't laying much, but he helped her patch a gap in the wire. They worked without much talk, but when he reached to hand her a nail, their fingers met again. This time, neither pulled away. That evening, while Florence and Finley played by the creek, Faye and Wyatt sat on the porch steps. Her sewing was in her lap, his hands resting on his knees. "I used to sing," she said suddenly, "before." "What stopped you?" Didn't see the point. He looked over at her. "I'd listen." She kept her eyes on the thread. She was nodding. "I'll think about it." They didn't say more. The sky deepened into indigo, and the frogs began their slow song in the low ground near the trees. When he stood to go, she followed him down the steps. "You should come by earlier tomorrow," she said. "Florence wants help building a kite." He smiled just a little. "I'd like that." This time, when he walked away, she watched until he was gone beyond the rise. Then she turned back to the cabin, the sound of the children's laughter drifting through the dusk. By Thursday, the wind had shifted. The last of the snowmelt soaked into the earth, leaving the yard soft and rich smelling, and the hills beyond the trees took on a faint green blush. Wyatt arrived just after noon with Florence trailing him, her cheeks flushed and hair tangled from running. She clutched a thin frame of cedar strips tied with twine, the bones of a kite. Faye leaned against the porch post, wiping her hands on her apron. "That string hold," she says. "It'll fly," Wyatt answered, glancing back at the girl with a look that held quiet pride. Florence held it up for her mother to see. "He showed me how to brace the tail so it won't spin wild," Faye nodded. "Then I hope the sky's ready for it." They carried it down to the pasture edge where the land opened flat. Finley waited there, crouched with a ball of twine and a dogwood branch he'd carved into a handle. When Wyatt stepped behind the children, his presence didn't hover or instruct, it simply steadied. Faye stood back, arms folded, watching as her daughter ran, the wind catching the kite and lifting it high. Finley shouted, boots kicking up dust. Wyatt didn't cheer, just smiled faintly, eyes following the arc of the string as the kite climbed. Later, after the children went off to gather creek stones for Florence's birthday game, Wyatt knelt by the fence post and began fitting a new crossbar. Faye brought out a mug of water and crouched beside him. "You always fixing things when you don't have to?" she asked. "Not always," he said, eyeing the fit of the rail, "but I like when something stands straight again." She watched his hands, rough and sure. "You ever build your own place?" "No." He tapped the wood into place. "Didn't see the point in hammering boards for a life I didn't have yet." Faye sat back on her heels. "You think you might, sometime?" He didn't answer at first, just drove the final nail with the heel of his palm and looked out toward the trees. "I think if a man's lucky enough to find something that holds, he ought to build around it." She stood slowly, dusting off her skirt. "That line, you come up with it on your own." He looked up at her. "Would have saved it if I had." That night, Faye laid out flour and lard on the table, measuring by feel. Wyatt brought in pine for the stove, his coat dusted in saw shavings. The children were upstairs, whispering about birthday surprises. She didn't look up when she spoke. "I haven't had someone to talk to in the evenings, not really." He didn't move closer, just leaned a hand on the doorframe. "I'm glad you let me be here." She rolled dough into a rough circle, the movement practiced. "I used to think quiet meant I was safe. Now I think maybe it meant I was just getting by." Wyatt took a step in, careful not to crowd her. "You don't have to get by anymore, not alone." She met his eyes, soft but steady. "I'm not sure what comes next. I'm not in a hurry," he said. "I'd rather walk it slow if it means we get there together." The stove popped behind her, and she turned back to the dough. "Then I hope you like biscuits." He grinned. "I do." They passed the evening shelling beans and talking about things that had nothing to do with loss or leaving. He told her about a bull he once chased through a dry arroyo for half a day, and she laughed so hard her shoulder brushed his. He didn't move away. By the time the moon rose, she walked him to the porch again. He stood there, hands in his coat pockets. "You ever think about staying longer than an evening?" she asked. He looked at her, and something in his face shifted, not surprise, but something deeper. "Yes," he said. She nodded once. "Then maybe we'll see how that fits." He didn't reach for her, didn't press for more. Just tipped his hat and stepped off the porch. Inside, the fire burned low, and the soft creak of the floorboards made her feel less alone than she had in years. Upstairs, Florence whispered something, and Finley giggled. Faye sat down at the table, pressed her hand flat against the warm wood, and let herself feel it the quiet, not empty but full. The morning of Florence's birthday brought a sky washed clean by midnight rain, the kind that made the air smell of wet bark and turned the garden soil dark and rich. Faye rose early, barefoot on the plank floor, and stirred the fire before the children woke. She set out the tin of cinnamon Wyatt had brought, measuring it into the flour with a care she hadn't taken since before the winter her husband disappeared. By the time the sun crested the ridge, the cabin smelled of warm sugar and brown butter. Florence came down the stairs with her hair plaited into 2 braids, a ribbon tied at the end of each, and Finley followed close behind, holding something behind his back. Faye turned from the stove. "You two whisperin' last night like I couldn't hear you through the rafters." "We made something," Finley said, stepping forward. He held out a folded square of bark paper with pressed violets glued along the edge. The ink was faint, but careful. Faye took it gently. "A card. It's for you," Florence said, "because we know you've been trying extra hard." Faye's throat tightened. She blinked, nodded, and tucked the card into the shelf beside the kitchen ledger. They spent the morning stringing creek stones along twine and hanging them from the porch beams. Florence wanted a lantern too, so Wyatt arrived near midday with a small one wrapped in cloth, the glass fogged from travel but unbroken. Faye met him at the fence. "You went all the way to Addison's place for this," he shrugged, adjusting his saddlebag. "Figured she's only 11 once." "She's 10, Faye said, but her mouth curved before she could stop it. Wyatt grinned small, quiet, and handed her the lantern. "Then we got another year to do better." That afternoon, they laid a wool blanket near the garden rows, and Faye brought out the cake, its top dusted in sugar, 1 candle set in the center. Florence sat cross-legged beside it, eyes wide. Wyatt passed Finley a whittled stick carved with his name, and the boy ran a thumb over the letters like it was gold. Faye sat beside Wyatt, close enough that her shoulder brushed his arm. She didn't pull away. Florence made a wish without telling anyone what it was, and they all clapped when the candle gave a single, flickering puff and went out. After the cake was eaten and the sun had begun its slow tilt west, Wyatt helped Faye carry the plates inside. He rinsed them while she dried, and they worked without needing to speak. The rhythm of it settled something in her. "Florence asked me if we were going to be a family now," Faye said quietly, folding the last towel. Wyatt turned, leaning his hip against the counter. "What did you tell her?" "I told her I didn't know yet, that we were figuring things out." He nodded once. "That sounds like the truth." She looked down at her hands, then at him. "I don't want to teach them to hope for things they can't hold on to." Wyatt's voice was soft, steady. "Then let them see you hold something real." The silence that followed wasn't heavy, it was full. Outside, the children were chasing evening shadows, their laughter carrying over the field. The lantern swung gently from the porch beam. Faye stepped closer, the towel still in her hand. "I keep thinking about what it means, handing someone a piece of your life." "You already have," Wyatt said. She looked up at him, eyes dark with something deep and certain. "Then I need to ask you plain, are you staying?" He didn't hesitate. "If you'll have me." Faye let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "I want you here, not just for the chores, for us, for me." He reached for her hand and she let him, their fingers laced together with the quiet ease of something earned. From the porch, Florence called, "Mama, come see what we found." Faye glanced toward the open door, then back at him. "You ready to be claimed by 2 wild children?" "I've had worse things said about me," he said with a quiet smile. She led him outside, her hand still in his. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the field, and the sky bloomed the color of ripe peaches. Something settled in her chest then, not the old weight of survival, but a new kind of stillness, one that felt like staying. The first week Wyatt stayed, he slept in the woodshed with a wool blanket and a cot made from cedar slats. He never asked for more. Faye never offered more than warm food and her silence at day's end, but even that had begun to stretch into something steadier, something deliberate. He mended the lean-to roof while Finley watched from a perch on an overturned bucket, asking questions about nails and knots and the way wood could split if you weren't careful. Wyatt never rushed his answers. In the evenings, once the children were asleep, Faye would sit by the hearth and mend, and Wyatt would sit across from her, often carving small animals from scrap wood for Finley's growing collection. When she asked him why he never carved people, he said it didn't seem right trying to shape what already had a soul. On a quiet morning near the end of April, Faye hitched the mule to the wagon and packed a basket for town. The children climbed in the back with a sack of old books to trade, and Wyatt sat beside her, hat low over his eyes, the wind teasing strands of her hair across her cheek. She didn't brush them back. His presence beside her was easy now, settled into the rhythm of things. At the general store, Florence spent nearly 10 minutes choosing a skein of embroidery thread while Finley bartered for marbles with an old man who'd once been a trapper. Faye paid for flour and lamp oil with eggs and a length of homespun cloth. Wyatt kept to the side, hands in his coat pockets, but when the storekeeper made a passing comment about Faye being lucky to have a man around again, Wyatt didn't look away. He only said, "She's not lucky. She deserves good." That night after supper, Faye stepped out into the yard while Wyatt worked at the fence line. The children were inside, the windows glowing soft with lamplight. She crossed the grass barefoot, skirts brushing the tops of her ankles. He turned when he heard her. "I've been thinking," she said, folding her arms loosely. "You've been sleeping in the shed for nearly a month." He didn't answer right away, just straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "Didn't want to assume. I know." She looked toward the porch, "But it's not right." "Not anymore." Wyatt's voice was low. "What are you saying, Faye?" She stepped closer, close enough to smell the cedar on his shirt. "I'm saying there's a place inside, not just for the night, for good." His eyes searched hers, careful, not for doubt but for certainty. "You mean that?" She nodded. "I do." He reached for her hand and she took it without hesitation. There was no fire between them, not the kind that burned fast and left cinders, but something quieter, warm and lasting, like coals banked beneath ash, waiting for morning. The next day, Wyatt moved into the cabin. Florence helped him clear a corner of the main room for his things, and Finley dragged a folded blanket to the foot of the bed and called it Wyatt's Square. Faye didn't stop them. In the weeks that followed, the garden rose flourished under 4 careful hands. Wyatt showed Finley how to trap gophers without killing them, and Faye taught Florence to read the weather in the shape of clouds. They built a smokehouse together, then a small chicken run, and after a long day of digging post holes, Wyatt sat beside Faye on the porch and asked quietly, "You ever think you'd feel safe again?" "No," she said. "But I do now." They were married in early June beneath the shade of the oldest pine on the property. Florence wore her mother's ribbon, and Finley carried a bouquet of wildflowers tied with string. There was no preacher, only Faye's soft voice and Wyatt's steady one, and a promise exchanged with hands clasped and eyes full. They marked the day not with a feast, but with a walk through the fields, the children chasing ahead and the sun dipping low behind the hills. Years passed gently. Wyatt built a new room on the cabin's east side, where the morning light fell warmest. They filled it with shelves and quiet conversation, with the rhythm of chores shared and burdens halved. Florence grew into a woman with calloused hands and a sharp wit, and Finley became a man who could fix anything with twine and patience. Fay never sang again in the way she had before, but sometimes, when she was bent over the garden rose, Wyatt heard her hum. And sometimes, when the wind was soft and the day had been good, she reached for his hand without needing to say a word. They grew old without noticing. Their love did not wane, it deepened, like the roots of the pines behind the house, steady beneath the soil, holding everything in place. And on quiet evenings, when the world was still, they sat side by side on the porch, the lantern swinging gently above, and watched the sky change color, knowing they had built a life that would hold come wind or time. They had each other. And they were home,